Good evening. As some folks are still coming in the room and finding their seats, I want to say thank you so much and welcome. We're so grateful that so many of you have come out tonight to this event, welcoming the stranger, loving our neighbor. A couple housekeeping items as folks are coming in. If you missed it on the way in, there are note packets on the tables there that you can grab one and follow along if you would like. We can also make this available to you electronically after this night's event. In the middle of your table are pens and blank papers. Those are for an activity later in the evening, so we'll let you know how to use those when the time comes. And we are recording this event. There are many people who couldn't come tonight who very much wanted to be able to learn the information and be part of what we're doing from afar. And so you're going to see Matt wandering around with a camera. And we will have some time for you to be able to make comments and ask questions. And so we'll facilitate that by bringing the microphone to you so that that can be heard in the room as well as on the recording. I don't know if there's anybody here I don't know yet, but in case I don't, my name is Becca. I'm one of the co-pastors here along with my husband, Dave. The primary presenters for the night will be our friends Keith Draper and Joel Duncan, who are both on staff at World Relief, who are our partners in this ministry. There are different facets of work at World Relief, some who do the direct person-to-person work with immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers here in the Chicagoland area, and those who empower the church to be a part of that work. And Keith and Joel fit into that second category, enabling and empowering people like us to do the work that Christ calls us to do. By way of kicking this evening off, you all know and have been recipients of the letter that we, along with the session, wrote and shared this last week, expressing our heart for the current situation that is going on in the Chicagoland area and our sense of the Christians' call to respond. That's all in a letter that I want to give a lot of credit to my husband for putting a lot of work into writing, and the elders who did the work of editing and helping put together to share with you all. So that all content is there, and I don't need to repeat it. What I want to share with you is a small piece of my heart related to this. All my life, I've wanted to be close to Jesus. I grew up as a pastor's kid, going to church, going to camp, going to everything. If the church put it on, I was there. And if you've ever been to Christian camps, especially as a kid or as a teen, there's always a night at camp where they give the invitation, where they tell you about Jesus, who he was, how he lived, how he died and rose again. And would you like to have that Jesus in your life? Would you like to invite that Jesus into your heart? And I will tell you, not because I was afraid, not because I felt bad, for no bad reason at all, only for love. Every time they made that invitation and said, everybody bow your heads and close your eyes. And if you want to accept Jesus into your life, you can raise your hand. And I rose my hand every single time. One of the other pastors in our church, I was best friends with his daughter. And one of the years at camp, she said, well, my dad says you're only supposed to do that once. And I was like, I'm in trouble. Because by that time, it had been about 20. So all my life, I've wanted to be close to Jesus. And my call to ministry as a pastor is because I have felt so passionately about inviting other people to know Jesus. I think the probably one of the most seminal moments of my sense of call to ministry was when I was a senior in high school. And I got to be part of praying with a freshman in my youth group as he invited Christ into his heart, and to know him over the following years as I saw Jesus transform his life. And to me, I thought, man, if people can pay you to do that, sign me up. I want to know Jesus, and I want people to know Jesus. So what does that have to do with tonight? Well, Jesus said, when the Son of Man comes in glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his throne in glory. And the king will say to those at his right hand, come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it for one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." My heart, and I think Dave along with me, tonight and in this letter and in this movement that I hope will follow, is that we would be close to Jesus. And I believe, because Jesus himself said so, that these strangers, these foreigners, the immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers in our midst are Jesus. And when we encounter them, get to know them, serve them, love them, we are doing that for Jesus. So wherever you are on the political spectrum, and it is a spectrum, let's not tell ourselves the lie that it's just right or left. There is a wide spectrum of beliefs represented in our church and represented in this room. I hope it is a wide spectrum in this room, that we're all not just coming to nod along, but that we're coming to learn, to be challenged, to grow. My hope for tonight is wherever you are, that you take a step towards following and getting to know Jesus through getting to know the stranger, the neighbor, the immigrant, the refugee, the asylum seeker in our midst. So let's pray together, and then I will hand it over to my friends. God, I want to pray the words of an old song that I sang at camp. Open my eyes, Lord. I want to see Jesus, to reach out and touch him, to say that I love him. Open my ears, Lord, and help me to listen. Open my eyes, Lord. I want to see Jesus. Amen. Amen. Please help me in welcoming Joel and Keith.
Thank you, Becca. Very good to be with you all tonight. We're tag teaming, so Joel will be up in just a minute. I do want to let you know that when we come to the Q&A time, I take the easy questions, so ask Joel the tough questions as we get into that later on in the evening. I appreciate Becca so much. I appreciate Dave and the words that you shared in your letter. They put wind in our sails, which is a great thing to have in these days. It's been some tough sledding, and we so appreciate when people see the opportunity in this and not all of the challenge, and see what God might be doing in our midst. I think we will be working toward both a biblical basis and an overview of what we're seeing of displacement in these days. Am I okay with sound? You guys good with what's okay? And then we're going to have a time where we work through a simulation where you get a chance to get to feel and to see and experience what many do experience in coming here. And so out of that information time and experiential time, then we'll move to a Q&A session where we want to try to answer questions for you as best we can, or lead you to resources that might help you find answers as you're seeking discovery. And then we want to talk a bit about how you might respond to that in these days. So just that is an overview for us. So I'd like to move to some biblical basis for this work. I have been in the Chicagoland area for 40 years now as a missionary. And I remember when I first moved to Chicago working in global work, global city work, I didn't see the city in the Bible at all. I thought the Bible was full of agrarian stories coming out of a rural setting that seemed to be very appropriate. And I remember a man named Ray Bakke, who was very concerned for urban missions in the city. And he brought urban life to life for me. And I have to say that World Relief has brought the immigrant the stranger, the sojourner, the alien to life for me in the scriptures. So I'm just going to point out a few of those that you see here. First, beginning in the Old Testament, for us to think about the stranger that is in our midst. The father of our faith, as we think about Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, was sent out to be a blessing to go to a land that he knew not. He was basically being sent as a foreigner in a land, as a migrant, because he really didn't know where he was going to end up in the sense of where he was going. But Scripture makes clear in Genesis 12 that God had a blessing that he had for him in his movement. Now, I'm not trying to extrapolate that to all people, but I am trying to say that when God moves people around, I think we'll find, even as we think about the times we're in, that there's something God is doing in the movement of people. Exodus, we have a whole book of the Bible devoted to the diaspora of people being moved around, of people who are sent. So even as we think about the books of the Bible, we have a whole book devoted to that subject. So it's not a minor theme in the Scriptures, it's a major theme in the Scriptures. And you can go through person after person. We're just going to mention a few of those. I think it's interesting then as you move into, let's say, Leviticus chapter 19, to see how the sojourner was part of the social systems that people were to be cared for. If you remember the whole term of gleaning, the idea of taking care of the corners of the field and not taking everything that was there so that the stranger or the foreigner or the alien might have a chance to take food in. And so we see even the social systems of early Jewish life, of the people of God, was making sure that we were in our social systems caring for those who were strangers or foreigners among us. And then in Deuteronomy chapter 10, I just heard a great sermon at College Church in Wheaton just a couple weeks ago from a mission pastor who was talking about this passage as really, when you think about how Jesus summarized the scriptures of what's most important, he quotes back to Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 10. And what he quotes there is basically, what does the Lord require of us? And as he's talking about the summary of what that is, it includes the idea that we care for the stranger or the alien among us. I was with a church in Aurora that said that their whole journey with us began because we were doing something called a 40-day challenge of the scriptures. And it was just 40 different passages off a bookmark. As you can see, it's a very worn one in these days. And they just decided to take a leadership retreat and read these 40 passages as leaders over a weekend retreat. And by the time they had finished all of the passages, the leaders of the church repented that they had ignored the needs of the stranger among them. And now they have been a good decade partner with us in the work. And what a blessing they have been. Then you think about certain people in the scripture. Think about David in his temporary migration of running, trying to find asylum in places as he moved around. And God was somehow at work in that movement and what was taking place. We see people who are moving around that weren't doing it all right. Even Abraham lied a bit about how he described his wife, if you remember. There's even non-perfect people that God's watching over and protecting them and doing something in their movement. Ruth, we think about Ruth as being a stranger coming back after the death of family members and basically joining her mother-in-law to come back to a land where she was a stranger, and Boaz took her in, Boaz being one of those lineage of who Jesus comes from. And so there's a work that God is doing in this tapestry of people that are in movement. And then we think about the prophets. The prophets, they shot pretty straight on telling the truth about things. One of my favorites, and I actually will refer to it at the end as we talk about response, is from Ezekiel chapter 22. And it's a picture of what was happening that was being ignored in Jerusalem at the time. And it begins by talking about the leaders of the country who were ignoring what God had given them a responsibility to care for. And then it talked about the fact that the priests weren't doing a very good job at it either, nor were the people who were prophets. And then it actually goes into the crowd. So David, if you want a sermon outline for this, or Yes, Becca, I'm happy to share that, but you've got 5 different audiences referenced there in Ezekiel chapter 22 who were all responding to the challenge that they had from Ezekiel about what they were doing. And it says that they were looking for someone who would stand in the gaps for those who were not being cared for. And it referred to the widows, the orphans, and the strangers. And it says, and the Lord saw no one, and the land was condemned. Pretty powerful statement. Prophets, as I say, shot straight and made some pretty strong statements. First book of the Bible I read was Jeremiah as a kid, and I remember he got thrown in the well every time he said something that was pretty tough. But they continued to do it. We moved to a little bit different tone as we get into the New Testament, and so there's some references here with that slide about Matthew 21. If you think about it, when Jesus had his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, he came in, and the first thing he did after he came in a lowly way on a donkey was to turn over tables. And my kids always loved that story. Jesus got hacked off, and he turned over the tables of the church. But what did he turn over the tables for? Not because they were just money changers. He said, you're making the house of the Lord as a place that is not welcoming to the nations, but you're making money there. And so the area where this was happening, where these money changers were, was in the outer courts. And the outer courts were reserved in the temple for strangers or aliens to worship the Lord. And they were using that space to make money and extort, rather than using it as a place to invite people who were not among the chosen to learn about him. As you can see, we can just walk through, and Joel's going to give me the sign in just a minute, like, hey, the biblical exposition is done. It's time to move on. Here's a few others. Acts 2. Think about this. In Acts 2, when the Spirit fell on the church, what was the first thing they did? They communicated the gospel in other languages to those that were around them. This isn't 201 stuff. This is 101 stuff that happens in the church, because when God's Spirit is among his people, we don't just think about ourselves. We start to cross barriers in our life, including language and cultural barriers, to reach them for him. Acts chapter 10, certainly the movement of the church beyond to the Roman people, and Cornelius being the first in that as an occupying soldier for them. Ephesians 2, that we're not to be either Jew or Gentile, but we're followers of him, male and female, Jew and Gentile. And then certainly the passage that's at Revelation 7 at the end of time, kind of the rest of the story, if you will, that every nation, tribe, and tongue will be around the throne of God. So we know what the end game is. So what's our journey toward that end? We're going to move a bit now to thinking about the global climate that we're in, understanding our global setting immigration-wise. And I want to say to you, when you think about what God is doing in our world in these days, I want to cast, if you look at any writing on macro trends facing our world, 2 of those intersect right here in Naperville, Illinois. One of those is the global migration of people. God is moving people around in record numbers in these days. When I started working with World Relief, I was retiring as a missionary, had worked among people groups for many, many years, came back to be in this area. We have 10 children, so to care for our children in the season that we were in. And World Relief said, we have a record crises. We have 65 million people who are globally displaced right now. That was 10 years ago. That was equivalent to the number of people who were displaced at the end of World War II from Western Europe. And that's what birthed our organization when it began. Churches caring about people who were displaced at the end of World War II, and fasting and praying during the Lenten season, and giving at that time what is equivalent to $3 million today as churches to say we need to do something to help these displaced people. 10 years later, this year, that number is now 124 million people. So it has doubled from what it was at the end of World War II. So there's this mass displacement of people that is part of our context. Another piece on that is that if you think about that in terms of population to ratio, that's about 1 in every 69 people on Earth are in a place of being displaced. Now, there are categories of that. There are people who are displaced that are going to a third country setting. And so that's where we see the term refugee used a lot to talk about people who are in a third location. There are people who are internally displaced. So they were in their city was bombed out or something happened, and they maybe moved to another part of their country, but they're internally displaced. So not all of these people would be people who have moved to a third country setting, but there is a lot of displacement. The other trend that I think really intersects Naperville, Illinois, is that we're in a global city. And within the next 5 years, our world will be more urban than rural. And so we are in a place where we see a city of Naperville, a Chicagoland area, that in the city is already minority majority, but in the suburbs, we're about 5 years away from that being the case out here. So there's this mass movement of people. There are these cities, these global urban areas where people from all over the world have come. And I think God's at work in the midst of that. So what do we do to hear him and understand what he's doing in that? So why does it exist? Why does forced displacement exist? It exists, and these are just some of those primary reasons, because of people who are fleeing conflict. We had 38,000 people who were approved to come here from Ukraine when the war broke out between Russia and Ukraine. We had to hire whole staff who spoke the language. We connected with 27 churches who were Slavic here that we said, you're going to be seeing this onslaught of people. What do you need? How can we help you? Because you're going to be the front lines of that. And that's been a great partner group of churches that's grown from 27 to now 42 Ukrainians and Russian-speaking churches here in Chicagoland. Persecution. People are persecuted. Maybe it's ethnic cleansing, differing views on things that might lead to a persecuted population. Extreme poverty. People who find themselves not making ends meet and looking for a place to move to and begin life over. And in many cases, not having a lot of choice to that. So I think sometimes we think people make movement just because they like one place better than the other. But if you ever thought about losing everything you have and starting over, in most cases, there's some kind of displacement that's caused by one of these things. And the final one that's mentioned here is climate-related changes. So certainly when you think about droughts in Africa, other places where the climate has changed so radically that now populations of people can no longer live in those settings. So we're going to talk a little bit about the challenge of that, and I think this is the last section. Is that correct here? What's that under displacement? So forced displacement and then the challenge of that? Yeah. So the challenge that's here is really that many of our new neighbors are feeling the pain of all of this. And so how are we coming alongside them in some way and helping them experience some kind of new life within the vulnerabilities that they're in? And if these aren't addressed, then our neighbors really remain our strangers. And so that really speaks to our theme tonight of not just thinking about how we see strangers, but how they become our neighbors. And so what is God doing to help us with our neighbors? So those are just, I think, wanting to set the stage for us to think more about what we see in these days. My favorite passage to wrap this would probably be from Acts chapter 17, where Paul is in the Areopagus, and he's describing for a people who are in a city full of idols, his God and who his God is, based on this unknown idol that is there. And he's saying that this unknown place of worship, this unknown idol, is to a God that they may have missed. They want to make sure they cover their bases with all of them. And he said, let me tell you about who this God is. And he mentions him in a very brief apologetic. But one of the things he says, I think it's in verse 26, is from one people God made all nations of people, and he determined the times and places that they live, so that they would seek him and others might find him, though he's not very far from any one of us. And the picture is that God is moving people around to where they ought to be so they'll know him. And I will say that in the people that we're serving, I find both extremes. I find people who we meet and churches encounter who have never met a Christian in their life, and we encounter people who've suffered desperately for Jesus where they were, and they're coming and starting life over. So something God is doing in that movement of people, I think, is leading more people to Him. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Joel. I'm the one to glaze your eyes over, and hopefully he'll wake you back up now and have some fun time together.
So we are about to do a simulation. Before we get there, want to sort of restate one of the things that Keith mentioned earlier as we're talking about this. World Relief, this is our mission statement in the top bullet point here. We exist to boldly engage the world's greatest crises in partnership with the church and with the community. And that's why the previous slide said World Relief and the church. We feel like God has placed us in this, but we feel like this is God's call to the church, and we don't want to do anything without the church, which means we don't want to be doing this without you, God's people, there alongside. And the church has been here with World Relief since the beginning. World Relief was birthed out of the church trying to respond to World War II. It's been in Chicagoland for over 45 years, and churches in the Chicagoland area have been doing this as an expression of their faith in Jesus, as a way to get closer to Jesus, all the way from the very beginning. So we are about to do a simulation and give you a chance to experience a little bit of what it is, what it might feel like along the journey of a refugee. But one of the things that we find to be very commonly true is that when you talk about immigrant, you tend to hear one of these things or the word immigrant, and in your mind, all of them get lumped together. But immigration is actually a pretty complicated umbrella term. And so just to give you an idea of some of these things, these are all groups of people that World Relief works with in different capacities. So we work with refugees. Refugees are people that have managed to get out of their country, away from whatever that persecution was, into a place where the United Nations has a refugee camp, and make the case that they were in danger from one of several categories: fear of persecution or death, war, some of these other things. They're actually able to make that case, and the United Nations does the research and says, okay, your story checks out. You're right, there's no way you can go back home. We'll find a country like the United States that is willing to let you resettle into a new safe home. That's refugees. That's one of the ones that, in my mind, is like the easiest to talk about, because even though the path is long and complicated, we're about to talk about it, it's clearer than some of the other paths. So people that are asylum seekers, that was that person in the refugee camp before the United Nations said, okay, you're a refugee. So when people are asylum seekers here, what they're doing is they're saying, I have had the experience that would designate me as a refugee. I just haven't had a chance to prove it yet. And so what they're asking for asylum, for the ability to be given that designated status, and they're asking for the chance to prove the case that they have been persecuted and that they are in danger. Then some other groups of people that we see all the time at World Relief, you might see special immigrant visa holders, which, Keith, remind me, what are some of the largest groups we have that follow this? Is this mostly the Afghanistan folks? And this would be a special visa afforded to them because of their relationship with the United States, often serving as interpreters or cultural liaisons for military in different places in the world, which then puts them in kind of a tricky situation depending on what the outcome of that is. Humanitarian parole, we would have people, the best example of this recently would be people from Ukraine, right? And they are given parole, which sounds funny because you hear it in criminal context, but actually what it is a temporary status, a temporary reprieve, because the situation that they're in is not safe in that moment. But it's not a guarantee or a permanent path towards citizenship. And so that would be the difference. If somebody has humanitarian parole status, they actually have to review that every couple of years. And the government will say, yes, the situations you're coming from, this is still an ongoing thing. We approve you to be continued for another 2 years. Come back and check in with us. Once it becomes safe enough in your home, then we will not allow the humanitarian parole to continue and you'll return home. Sorry? So then there's other immigrants in different categories, and what Keith's talking about is oftentimes you can change status, right? These pathways, they're not completely separate from each other, so you might be able to move into different categories. But even in just talking about it, I've spent, several minutes giving a sentence explanation of each one, and that's not doing justice to any of these categories. These are very complicated things, and only the top two here have a guarantee of citizenship at the other end. The others are temporary, and most of them do not have a path where you can end up becoming a citizen of the United States. You can be here for a period of time, you can be authorized to work, but you're not guaranteed citizenship at the other end. And we say that because, so in the other immigrants category, you could have students, you could have people here on work visas for special skills and fields and things like that. You can find easily 20 other categories here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a minute and we're going to try to walk in their shoes. Okay? So I'm going to be the teacher for a minute here. So everybody grab one of the blank pieces of paper that's in the middle of your table and fold it so that there's 4 equal sections. So fold it in half and then half again. And this part's not a trick. It's not a big deal if your 4 sections look different than anybody else's. But once you get those 4 sections split, go ahead and rip the paper so that those 4 sections are separate from each other. So you should have 4 pieces of paper that aren't connected to each other anymore, roughly the same size. This is probably the most complicated part, just so you. But see, this is what Keith's talking about waking you up, right? You were listening to people talk and talk and talk. And you're like, wait, I have to fold this paper? It's not origami class. What's going on here? Okay. For those of you that have your 4 separate sheets of paper, you can go ahead and do the next step, which is, with each one of those individual sheets of paper, fold it in half and half again so that you get 4 smaller pieces of paper. So you repeat the exact same thing that you did, but with each one of the smaller pieces of paper. The idea is, when you get to the end, you'll have 16 little slips of paper that you can write on. Okay? That's really the end goal, is we need 16 slips of paper. Just gonna wander around. How you guys doing? We doing pretty good? This for me is the boring part, because I'm really excited about what we get to do with the pieces of paper, and so. Plus, I'm not folding and ripping the paper, so. All right, are you seeing the shape of the swan yet? If you are, you did something different than what I told you. You guys are troopers. This is awesome. Great job. When you get these ripped up, what you want to have sitting in front of you is 4 piles of 4, because I'm going to get you to write different things in each one. So go ahead and do the 4 piles of 4 and grab a pen, and it will start to move quicker. And I should have just had this next part on a slide, but I'll just repeat it as much as you need it, okay? So, for the first set of 4, write 4 activities that you enjoy. So each piece of paper is going to have 1 activity that you enjoy. It can be soccer, it could be reading, it could be knitting, it could be talking, it could be drinking coffee. 4 activities that you enjoy, 1 per piece of paper. And then you can set that pile of 4 to the side. Four activities that you enjoy. Okay, second pile. And I'll go back through these if you're like, oh, wait. It's okay. The second set of 4, you're going to write 4 things that you are thankful for. So again, 1 per page, 1 per piece of paper. 4 things you are thankful for. People is the next one. So, yeah. 4 things you are thankful for. So the first group was 4 activities you enjoy. This second group is 4 things you are thankful for. All right, the third group is going to be 4 people who are important to you. And if you're like me, I'm the oldest of 9 kids. That's going to be really hard because there's not enough slips of paper for all the important people. That's okay. This is just a simulation. 4 people who are important to you. So the first group was 4 activities you enjoy. The second group was 4 things you are thankful for. This third group should have 4 people who are important to you. And if you have some of them sitting next to you, you should probably write their names. And then the fourth group of 4 pieces of paper should have 4 roles that you currently play in your life. This could be brother, this could be accountant, this could be dog walker, this could be lots of things, right? 4 roles that you currently play in your life. And keep the piles neatly separated the way you have them for the moment. You should have a pile that has 4 activities that you enjoy, a pile that has 4 things you are thankful for, a third pile that has 4 people who are important to you, and this last one that you're probably still writing on is 4 roles that you currently play in your life. You can write those down, but you need 4 more pieces of paper. And you also owe me $100. Okay, so the simulation is now about to start. You needed this in order to be able to work your way through the simulation. So please remain quiet, and I'm going to read this out to you. Your country has been at war since before you were born. You never know when you leave your home to go to school or to work if you will return home safely. Things are getting worse. Your children haven't gone to school in 6 months. It's not safe for them to leave the house. You just heard that your neighbor was kidnapped. Yesterday, there was a bombing at the market that you go to every day. You fear death will come to you and to your family. You must flee. There are no longer any other options. Your family cannot say goodbye to anyone because it could threaten your safety on the journey that you're about to take. What will you take with you? So in the next minute, quickly choose one of the things that you have in front of you. One thing or person from each one of the 4 piles that you're going to have to leave behind. Rip them up and put them in the middle of the table. One thing from each pile. Do it quick. You don't have much time. You are on a journey. One thing from each pile, you rip it up and throw it into the middle. You had to leave that behind. You don't have to answer yet, but I want you to think about, how does it feel to have to make a quick decision about something that you have to leave behind, especially when you just put so much work into writing that down? All right. You should have piles now with only 3 cards in each one, and I want you to turn them over so that you can't read what's written on those piles anymore. Without looking to see what's on the card, take one piece of paper from each pile, tear it in half, and throw it into the center. Don't look at what you threw away. This is the part of the journey that many of our refugees experience. It's unknown. Sometimes you do not know what you lost until later. How does it feel as you're thinking about this and just experiencing it? How does it feel to not know what you have just lost? Your family survived the journey crossing the border, but now you must wait in a refugee camp. You've had no contact with other family members or friends. Are they safe? Is your home still standing? Did your neighbors make it out safe? Keeping all your piles spaced down, just sit quietly and ponder that loss and the unknowns of your future. How does it feel to have things taken from right in front of you? How does it feel to lose more than others, or to not lose while others did? You have lost power to make decisions for yourself or your family. How does it feel to lack control over your circumstances, your loss, your future? There are so many families in the refugee camp. You're beginning to realize you may wait here for years. Will your family's claim for refugee status be granted? Will you be chosen to resettle? This group right here is lucky. One of you is chosen to be resettled. You're going to leave for the United States next week. When you arrive in the U.S., you're going to have no control about where you live. You'll rely on a single case manager, possibly a volunteer from a local church, and you'll be entrusting your lives to a stranger. The rest of you must wait in a refugee camp. The United Nations officer will be back in about 6 months to inform the camp if anyone else is chosen for resettlement this year. You can turn the papers over that you still have left and see what remains. So thank you for letting me walk you through this. I know it can be very intense for those of us that are able to imagine this, but it gives a quick snapshot of what many, many, many refugees have to go through. And we're taking this as a way to move into some of the conversation back and forth. So as you're evaluating what's left in front of you there, I wanted to ask a few questions and ask if you were be willing to share what the experience is like for you. So, first question is, what emotions or thoughts came up for you during this?
Survive.
Survive. You felt that's like there's a need for survival, even though it's pieces of paper in front of you. A lot of not knowing. And Pastor Beck is coming around for tip.
Fear.
Loneliness.
Helplessness.
Angry was here in the front. Sad, yeah. What out of this was the hardest part? Not knowing. Especially when you had them turned over, right? You didn't know what you had just ripped up and thrown away. What else? Loss. Can you say a little more?
What I lost, I only had half of what I had before.
How many other people in the room ended up with about half of what you had? Some people had a lot less than half, but easily there's a big section of the room. What did it feel like when we came around and took things from you?
My lucky day, because nothing was taken.
Felt lucky. He was one of the ones that had nothing taken from him. Oh, fear that he was going to be next. Yeah. Anger. Right. What are you doing? Give me that back. It's mine.
Sadness for somebody that everything was taken and I didn't lose anything.
Right. So you had someone next to you that had things taken, and you were feeling sad because you didn't. I came up and just took one of his piles, and I took all of his kids. I didn't know it, but protectiveness. Yeah. So the experience is intended to give us a small moment of identity with many of the people that Keith and I were describing to you, that people on World Relief staff and the churches all around Chicagoland interact with every day. Because many, most, if not all, of the people have losses like this in their story. Loss of control, anger, no understanding of why things were being taken or why they had to leave things behind, or no choice in the matter because of the circumstance. People that have had to have this experience, that have gone through the experience of becoming a refugee, they're very brave. They've endured very tremendously difficult things. And one of the things that we find is that loss often develops in them virtues and strengths for their journey that I can only learn from because it hasn't been my personal experience, but I can hold up in high esteem. My personal experience with this was about 10 years ago. There was a woman who came from the Congo, and she had a son with her that's about the age of my oldest son. So they were good buddies. And a year or two after she was here, she learned from family members back home that I think this was her father. She's had multiple family members pass away, but a family member had passed away. And we're with her, and she's grieving, and in the middle of crying at having just gotten this news over the phone while we were there with her. This was fresh for her. She says, a woman of similar faith to us, she says, "Thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God." And I remember my wife and I just looking at each other and going, wait, I mean, I get on paper how that works to say, thank you, God, in the middle of hardship. But literally, she just learned that her family member died. That's a thanksgiving and a praise that I don't know if I know how to do. And so we were there to comfort her, but we were also learning. So we are going to take a step further in now. That was the experience. But what we want to do is move closer in, right? We've given you the context. We want to respond to the context biblically, but we want to take a step further in. So these are approximate numbers, but they'll give you a sense of the scope of things. So if you're just looking at Chicagoland, the larger Chicagoland area, there's about 10 million of us that live here. And of those 10 million, about 1.8 million were born outside the United States. So it makes it about 18%, roughly 1 in 5, 1 in 6 of the people that live here in Chicagoland were born outside the United States, now live here in Chicagoland. Many of those have become citizens, and that leaves about 8%, or about 800,000 people that are non-citizens of all stripes, all of those categories that I had up on the previous slide, right? But they're not yet citizens. So when we talk about immigration enforcement, when we talk about what we're seeing with Customs and Border Patrol and ICE, the stated goal of this increased enforcement that has been happening over the past 8 months, but particularly over the last couple, is to reduce violent crime. And Keith, you're about to come back up, but he said hard questions, but I want him to be up here in case he's answering hard. But so some of those specific numbers about enforcement, right? So that's the big numbers context. Here's what we're seeing right now is that this year, from the data that we are able to gather from a variety of sources, watchdog groups, as well as government reporting, lots of, like any way that we can get cross-check this information, we know that there's been somewhere over 2,600 people that have been detained in Chicagoland this year. More than 1,500 of those have been since the enforcement increase in September. Much more than half has happened in the last 8 weeks, 7 weeks. Those same groups that are compiling that information, they're learning about who was detained as best they can. They're learning backgrounds and history. They're learning about warrants that were out against them. They're learning about reasons why they were detained. And a conservative estimate is that 60% of those people have no sort of record at all. And they don't have a parking ticket to their name. And some of the numbers would say even up like 70% of the people that are detained. Just trying to be conservative. Then you have 7% of that 1,500 or that 2,600, it's about the same for both, actually do have some sort of criminal record, violent crime of some kind. Saying that because the stated goal is here. But from everything that we can get information on, not believing in what we want to believe, working really hard to verify that information, 7% of the people are actually fall into that category that fits the stated goal. Okay. This is an important piece of information. So several of those statuses that we had listed up there, temporary protected status, humanitarian parole, right? They don't have a path towards citizenship, but because of the situation in their home country, they are granted a period of time in which they can live and work in the United States because it is unsafe to live and work in their home country. We know that over 1.5 million people across the United States arrived through this pathway, which is a legal pathway to live and work in the United States for a temporary period of time. But since January, that status has been revoked, and often with a pretty short window of information. So if you think about somebody who's thinking, I have 2 years that I can live and work here, keep my family safe here. Oh, next month I won't have any sort of status. You're taking my legal pathway of living and working here away. So next month I can't work. But where do I go? I only have a month to figure this out. That's another simulation we could do, right? Okay, you've got 1 month and you've got a heads up and a warning, figure out where you're going to move somewhere around the world, but you can't be in the United States. It's a difficult thing to do. The impact that we are seeing from this, because it's not about the fact that people with violent crime records and warrants out for them are being arrested. It's the fact that the process is grabbing quite a few other people, including kids, that don't have any of that record. That's 60%, 70% that don't have any sort of record to their name. And what we're seeing is it's creating a lot of fear. We have people that we know have refugee status. They're walking around with a green card. In a couple of years, they will be able to take the citizenship test. Refugees have to be here for 5 years before they can take the citizenship test. In a couple of years, they can do that. But they are worried, desperately worried, that they are going to be targeted for enforcement and that they won't have their green card, or that people won't believe them, and that they're going to be disappeared, because that's what they're seeing. And it's creating a lot of fear, and it's not unfounded. We know yesterday in our Chicago office, there was ICE enforcement activity. One of our clients was coming to visit our office, our case managers, because they're working through the process. They were detained on the street behind our office and were taken away. These are people that are working with us to make sure that they are following the processes that they are afforded. Some of them know it's not citizenship, it's temporary, but they're still trying to work that way through. It creates a lot of isolation. And I've been telling people this is similar to COVID in the communities that feel like they're targeted at all. It's creating this isolation because they feel like there's no telling. It's like with your cards turned upside down. I don't know if I'm going to be picked next, if I'm going to be in the spot where there's enforcement activity. And I don't know if my English is good enough to explain to them that it's okay for me to be here. And it then causes them to isolate to places where they can find safe, which is usually inside their house or their apartment. This one's bothered me a lot. It's distrust. There's a lot of, particularly distrust of any sort of law enforcement. And I've had the police officers in our town, Keith and I live in West Chicago, pretty much weekly, sometimes daily, saying, this is what we're doing. Our job is to keep the peace. Our job is to do this. We are not part of that. If you need law enforcement, please still reach out to us. We are trying to help keep this community safe. But because they're authority, they get matched up with federal authority, and it all feels the same, and people distrust police departments that have spent years trying to build trust in their communities. We're seeing many, many families separated. And if you're thinking about the experiences that we described during the simulation, many of the places that people were coming from, they're leaving very traumatic situations. And so they're seeing this again, and this feels like the situation they ran away from 3 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago. And so we're seeing the outcome of these things hurt people in a way that we know is not the way that, even if we're trying to reduce violent crime, that we know that this is not the way that Jesus would want this to work. We know that there are better ways that this can happen. So we're taking this down to here. That's an overview. And so what we wanted to do at this point, because we've talked about context, because we've talked about different categories of people, because I've mentioned what we're seeing in our town, and Keith, you can add anything to it you want, but we also wanted to open it up to you guys. So we wanted to say, okay, what are you seeing and hearing? What are your questions? What are your thoughts? This is a time for us to have a little bit of conversation.
How do we reconcile the difference? Look at that slide. It has ERO on it. We have such a wide spectrum. Some people would put a Z in front of it, and others would put an H in front of it. So some people feel like this is zero. Others, they feel like it's a hero. How do we reconcile, get those two sides back together?
I'll take the easy one here. So the way we have been addressing this has been to begin with what the scriptures teach us about these things. And blessed are the peacemakers, for they'll inherit the earth. We are not going to solve this within church life. We're not going to solve it in our community life, but we can be salt and light in all of those settings. So what are the things that we can do to care for and help people who have these experiences in life for them right now? We're not going to solve all of them. We're not going to resolve all of the differences, but we can do something to point people to something that would encourage them. I love when Syria imploded in 2016, we have an office that had been in Atlanta, and we were involving quite a few churches in that, and they heard about a church that they thought was very interesting. So 60 Minutes did a whole show on this, and they were talking about how do we help all of these people from Syria. Primarily had been prompted by the little boy that had washed up on the shores of Aleppo in Greece, and people felt we need to do something to help. And because this particular church was an evangelical church, they had not seen, at least for 60 Minutes, they had not seen a lot of what they thought were white evangelical churches in that space. So they brought the pastor on to talk about it. And I loved his answer when they said, so why are you in this space? And the pastor, I still remember exactly the words that he said. He said, I think it's our government's responsibility to keep its citizens safe and to protect our borders. But I think it's the Christian's responsibility to love our neighbor and to welcome the stranger. If we expect the government to do their job, then we need to do our job as Christians. And so I think sometimes we conflate what is it that is the responsibility of our government and what are our Christian responsibilities as followers of Him. And so what are the things that we can do to offer that cup of cold water, the Matthew 25 passage? What can we do to show compassion and care? Not to contradict, but just to provide some hope, some security, some peace, some support for people who are in hard places. You want to speak to it?
You might have partially helped me in my head, but I'm trying not to climb under a rock and think it will go away. I have come to the realization that I've got to be out there fighting for these people. And part of that, I think, is having discussions among friends, neighbors, people around you, so that everybody gets out there and we're not hiding under the rocks. And so when people say to you, oh, well, they must be illegal, but there's all these categories of refugees and their status has been changed all of a sudden on them, how do you respond to those people?
I had a story I wanted to share specifically about the word illegal, so you triggered it when you asked about that. My birthday was earlier this month, and it was super fun to celebrate. What I didn't realize is that on my birthday, my driver's license expired. So it took me a couple weeks to figure that out. And so for that period of time, I realized I'm driving around undocumented. I'm not a legal and valid driver. I do not have a valid driver's license on my person. And what happens with the word legal, and this is it's easy to hide under a rock if it doesn't affect you, is to go, oh, but they did something illegal. Well, in the category that lives in, and immigration, borders, visas, all that sort of stuff, it lives in the same category as having an expired driver's license. So I would live in that category, but I don't know anyone that would look at me and go, you're illegal because your driver's license is expired. But we do that because we don't take the time to lean in to explore what that nuance looks like. And I think the easiest thing to do is to feel like it's too big. But something like tonight is that step of like, okay, let's lean in a little bit. Let's talk about this. Let's define our terms. And let's explore what this actually means for people. Because words carry a lot of power, but if we don't wield them well, then I lived most of this month as someone who is illegal. And yet none of you would have ever said that to me. You know.
I think the only thing I would add, a great illustration of that is that it seems like in the settings I'm in that often there are two categories of immigrants. They're the legal ones and they're the illegal ones. And that's the only ones. And so I think helping people think about different statuses of people, not as one or the other in a binary way, but to think about why people are here and what their circumstances are. And when you begin to hear their stories, it really changes you. And my story would be that just a couple of months ago, I had an Afghan woman who came into my office. She was not of a most conservative sect of Islam, that she couldn't talk to men. She didn't wear coverings. But she came to me and she said, could I go with you to recruit Christians to help us? And I said to her, I won't share her name, I said, well, what are you thinking? Like, what would you like to do? And she said, well, when I came here, And I will share the place from Afghanistan. 99.9% of the people who came there are Muslim by background. She said, I don't know what happened to my husband with the Taliban, but I have my wife and kids, and I knew I had to get out of the country. And so I showed up here with them as children. And when I got to the airport, there was an elderly couple from a church that met me at the airport. And they have so loved and cared for my family that they are my mom and dad now. And my kids call them their grandparents. And I had never met a Christian before, and these are the most lovely people I've ever met in my life. And I'd like to see a lot more of them do things like this. And guess what? She's on the road with me occasionally. I'm going to churches, and we just sit on a church platform and a couple stools, a couch, depending on how the church wants to do it. And people have just interviewed me, and we've interviewed her and had her tell a little bit of her story and her journey. And so I think it's the grays that we sometimes, get into of want to see things so black and white, so binary, and yet there are gradations, and where do we take the time to learn about the differences, and how do we not see people as categories, but as individuals that have gone through different things, some very hard things in life, some things where there's great wrong there. And so I think we just need to see that there are gradations. Yeah. We'll try not to be so long with every answer. I guess that's not going to give us enough questions around the group here. So
This is more of a question for Becca and Dave. What do we do as a church? Active. What do we do other than just talking to people and trying to help people understand? What actions can we take?
they can answer, but I am going to give some next steps.
We're setting us up, but we'll see if there's more questions before we get to that.
So at one point in my life, I was a government employee. I worked for the Department of Defense. I'm not tied in with ICE, law enforcement. I have family in law enforcement. But what I struggle with based on some of my background is we have in the States, the United States Code. So you take a look at Title 8, USC, you've got Section 1234 where they talk about illegal aliens. It's a definition under the law. What we're talking about, what I heard your example on illegal, I know you were using as an example, but it's not the same thing. Words have meaning. And if we can separate out the legal aspect when somebody's called an illegal alien, because it's defined in usually those, versus people that I think is pretty impressive on how you've categorized. You mentioned we don't want to categorize people, but quite frankly, if we can categorize these people in these 5 groups, those prioritize or separate out where things can maybe be done if people in the government would get together and start taking a look at what we do for immigration process. So I quite frankly, with my brothers in law enforcement, I do bristle every once in a while when I hear people arguing about illegal aliens. They're not that, they're humans. Well, we know they're humans. We need to, I think, categorize it that way so we can get down to talking and pushing these issues. So I didn't really have, I had a question or a comment, if you will, but I really think that's important to get down to the basic. If we don't define the items, we're going to be talking over each other. We're going to be talking, we think the same to each other, and we're not. One last question, and Dave and Becca know that I like to maybe throw out a few things here, but I'd also like to see if you could address the differences from the early 1900s when my relatives, my grandparents, came from foreign countries and they went through this process as well. And they were in some respects refugees, asylum seekers. They went through the process. I don't know what's different about that then. I know there's different restrictions, but they made it through and they seemed to follow the process legally. And they had help from churches, they had sponsors, they had all the things you're talking about. So I'm just hopeful that we can get to the point in the country one time where we're going to start narrowing down towards that as real help.
That's great. You didn't hit too much there, so we'll be able to answer quickly. No, but what I do love is that you put your finger on something that we try to help people see a lot, which is that it's not that we think that there shouldn't be any laws about who can come into the country and who can't. It's about the process and the way that they're enforced. It's about the language that the general public uses to talk about it when they don't use the term illegal, the way that it's written out in that. And it's the way that people are treated in light of other things. Like one of the biggest criticisms of the current enforcement is that due process is taking a backseat, and that it's coming after the fact. And people are, instead of being innocent until proven guilty, they're categorized and then have to prove that they're innocent to get out of that. And I think that conversation around that process and actually saying, that's one of the things that we'll talk about in like the advocacy point, because one of the things that we ask a lot of churches to consider doing that feels a little bit foreign of like, oh, well, we're not supposed to mix politics and our faith. And we say, okay, but our faith does inform the way we want the world to be, and we can advocate for that. And so we'll talk about that. That's all I'll say for that. Did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying is that we have a broken system right now, and that system needs to be fixed. And I think that crosses categories within our life. When someone does not have a path, or someone has a path and they're jumping over someone else, like sometimes in the immigrant church, there's very big pain about this because, you know, the average wait for someone, let's say, coming from the Philippines to here is about 18 years to get into this country. So how can someone cross a border and be here in 6 months when I waited 18 years to get in? And what that says to me is that we need comprehensive immigration reform. So we don't need to just add laws or take laws away. We need to figure out systems that are better to do that. And that's challenging because we have these categories. It takes time to do that. But I think it's a work that needs to happen in these days. And in terms of like the generations younger and older, my background is mixed in that way, as many of us are. So my grandmother was Choctaw Nation. And so you're all immigrants. And she didn't take too kindly to them either. In fact, it caused the divorce of my great-grandmother, great-grandfather. She returned to the reservation, put the children in an orphan's home, one of those being my grandmother, and my great-grandfather and great-grandmother never talked again. So I'm not saying that there are easy ways to solve all of these problems. My mom's family was German, my dad's family English, and all of us have our stories. I think what's interesting is that in 1980, the Refugee Resettlement Act was put in place to try to help deal with people who were not able to come here from some countries and bring more equity to the system. And two people of faith played a very big part of that, Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. Both of them saw faith communities like our organization as important to that process, to bring sponsors back into the mix, to have churches be a part of the process. That act passed in 1980 under Jimmy Carter, and the biggest resettlement happened under Ronald Reagan in the next administration. So we have seen this work in bipartisan ways. We've seen Democrats and Republicans get into this space, and right now we're very polarized. And so I think, how do we bring and find some common ground to try to create some systems that need to be improved on, that need to be changed to allow this to take place, and to allow the equity of that it not be people only from certain areas of the world or people of only certain races that would be allowed, but that it be a place where all of us could come and be a part of that. So I know I sound like an idealist, but I think that's part of where we need to get to, is get back to some healthy systems and definitions again.
And we love to stick around and have more conversations. But as I'm looking at the time, I want us to be able to have conversations after this. But one of the questions I got asked that we said we would answer later is, what do we do? And it was thinking specifically about your church, but I wanted Keith to speak to some of these things that we invite churches to do.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about ways to respond here. I mentioned Ezekiel 22, the picture of standing in the gaps for those among us who are widows, orphans, and strangers. And so I like to use that as an acronym to think about how you might respond to this. The G would be for giving, how you might give toward this. One of the challenges that we're finding these days are just scarcity of resources to meet needs. And so we have, as a church, you have been a generous church to help toward needs that we've had. So your giving allows this work to continue. There would not be as much going on if we didn't have churches and individuals who have donated to this work, because public dollars are much less and they're going away more. So people's financial support allows us to provide services like this. One of those big areas, though, is housing. Housing is a great challenge in these spaces. So we've, if you've got, in our neighborhood, we had 31 families that were separated. And if someone leaves who's the breadwinner, how do they pay rent? How do they take care of their kids? There's a pastor in this community that came to me, and he said, a young man was taken from our church, left with his wife and his 3 and 2-year-old, and turned out he actually was here legally, but he was taken from the home, taken from the 3 and 2-year-old, and he came to church angry, and he spoke out of his anger. And the church got upset, and he was trying to figure out how to take next steps. And he said, I just need to talk this out and figure it out. And I saw a shepherd caring for his flock, not sure what to do. And he was able to be returned, but it was a very hard moment for the church and for the people as that was happening. So housing is a part of that. Basic things that churches can collect to help with these kinds of needs. So we certainly find that school supplies, coats, depending on the season, food scarcity is very big, people not able to get out. And so we have gift cards. Some churches have done gift card campaigns to try to provide food. If you have a connection to a shelter, some of the shelters are trying to find ways to get food out to families, and they're looking for people to volunteer to help in those spaces. So very practically in giving. Under the A for advocacy, we were talking about these policies. So what are the policies? We have something that we have seen as a bipartisan effort to try to deal with some of the broken immigration reform that needs to happen, called the Dignity Act. And we'd encourage you to take a look at that. It's being received on both sides of the aisle, but we don't see any movement yet on those new policies. So what could you do to speak up about these things? If you feel due process is something that you want to step into that space, can you call your representative or your senator? We have a way of you responding at the end here where you can find out who that is and how to make that phone call. In the daytime when we've done this, we've actually made those calls directly. Someone answers and they read off something that they want to say, and then it's logged. It's not who you are, it's what percentage of their constituency are calling in. So it's important for you to think about what things you might do to speak up about these things. What can you do to share that information with others? And so we have an event that's happening up actually next Thursday, if you might be interested in it. And it's really hearing the stories from different churches and how they're in this space right now to help. It's happening Thursday night from 7 to 8:30. Holy Trinity Church is playing host to that in the city. And it's an RSVP, and then there's this QR code where you could respond. So that's just one example of ways that we're trying to provide more information for advocacy. Next, there's a new area of volunteering that we are actually working. We just hired someone this week who will be helping in this space, and that is in the area of accompaniment, or providing accountability. And accompaniment means that if someone's going to have their citizenship appointment, or if they're going to have their case adjudicated, they can have someone join them there. And so we are going to be building out a volunteer opportunity where you could go and be with a person who's going to go through that process. So if they're going to check in for an appointment on their citizenship, if they're going to court, you could come and be with them. Some people are helping as interpreters, but some are just there to be support to them. So that's an opportunity to be more of an advocate. In terms of prayer, and these are coming up awfully quickly, and I'll point out one of them with the next slide. And that's the call to prayer that we actually were given from the Little Village community, New Life Churches. You may be familiar with Moody Bible Institute, Mark Job. The New Life churches that are part of their network of churches have a church in Little Village, and their pastor, whose name is Paco Amador, has said that this has been challenging for their community in Little Village. And so they've put a call out to say, would you come pray in under the arch in Little Village, which is actually the largest Hispanic community in the Midwest. And there are pastors from the south side, from the west side, from the north side that are coming out for that evening for just an hour. And we invite people, if you'd like to come out and be a part of a prayer time under that arch, just to pray for those who've been through that trauma. We had an event in February. I've talked to some here around the tables here that came out. We did a prayer event here in Naperville at a church nearby. And we still have people who say that changed my life, having that prayer time with small groups of people from all different churches around that. We prayed in 5 languages that night of different populations we had resettled. So prayer, finding ways to pray. We don't believe that this is possible without prayer. And so your prayers within your setting, finding ways to pray with others for healing, for families not to be separated, for systems that are dignifying, pray about all those things, and then find ways to act on that. And then finally, under S, this would be thinking about ways that you might serve. I mentioned accompaniment, but think about this. If you are finding fear in these times, what are the things that you can do to help people in their isolation? It's what this table, I think, is part of that Good Neighbor team. Maybe as a group, you might come alongside a family and just help them as they're adjusting to life here. We say the expectation is, can you check in on a family once a week and see how they're doing? Now, if you feel like you want to do that as a family, you could do that as a friendship partner. But if you'd like to do it with some others, you might form a team and have a Good Neighbor team. And you've had that here at the church. We have churches all over the place that are coming alongside families in isolation and just checking in on them. We provide services. We're not asking you to pick up all of those services. We're just asking you to be a friend to someone who's isolated and fearful and lonely in these times. So the questions that we want to leave you with are these two, and then have the pastor or pastors come up and speak about this. What has this looked like at Knox Presbyterian Church, and what is God putting on your heart from this evening? So I'd love to have them come up and help us take whatever next steps would be here.
Yes, we are at 8:30. Want to say a couple things about what those next steps could be. And I do think there is one last slide too with some QR codes of things that you can do. So we do have a home team here. And Tom and Georgia and Mary have all been a part of becoming friends and companions to 2 families now successfully. Successful in that they have continued to take steps in their journey of resettling here in the United States, but also sad for us because those steps have led them away from the Naperville area. But my understanding is we are actively looking into coming alongside another family, and there is capacity for us to come alongside more than one family. And so if that's a ministry that you are interested in being a part of, Georgia and Tom and Mary are the people to talk to get on their list. There is a training process to go through so that you can be more culturally competent in coming alongside people and being the friends that they need. But that would be a really profound way for us to do this. For the size and capacity of our church, we can come alongside more than one family. I think really the question is how many? You know, what really is God calling us to do in this time? There are, Tom, also we have a printout of some other things that you can do as an individual, things that you can give, ways that you can offer your acts of service and resources.
I would echo what Becca said. I think joining the home team is a great way to get involved and to do concrete good for real children of God who really need our help. The other thing I'd encourage you to do is check out the Dignity Act. I hadn't heard about it until I learned about it from World Relief. And it's one of those things where you read it and immediately I think anyway, oh yeah, this would be great. It is a bipartisan bill that would help resolve a lot of the problems. And I just mention it because it doesn't have to be this way, right? We don't have to have the kind of immigration enforcement we're seeing in Chicago right now. And we don't have to live with this interminable, unresolvable immigration problem in our country. And I just want to, your voice, your engagement in the democratic process can be very powerful as well to make things like the Dignity Act seem more plausible and more possible for us. So I encourage you to check that out and contact your representatives as well.
In the letter, we gave you that the steps to make it really easy to do that. There's a website you go to. It tells you who your representative is or are, their phone numbers, their email addresses. You'll probably just get a voicemail system or an intern. And some of those places even give you a script to say. It's not getting it right. It's just getting your voice heard and said, oh, one more person said Dignity Act. Oh, another person called today. It said Dignity Act. The more people do that, they start to go, oh, maybe we should pay attention to this.
That's absolutely true. And if 5 people call, they might shrug it off. But if 20 people or 50 or 100 call, they sit up and take notice. They really do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Call or call back if you're really passionate about it.
Yeah, one pastor in Chicago who I've been listening to and paying attention to a lot is a guy named David Swanson. Really, really respect him on a lot of levels. And he has been pretty vocal around this particular issue. And I just so appreciated in an interview recently like how he continues to call his church to pray. He says, you know, there are a lot of people called to do a lot of things in this world for good. We as a church are called to pray, and there is power in our prayer. That's not an add-on, that's a must-do. And so we are going to close our shared time together with prayer. Dave and I are here. Keith and Joel are here to answer your individual questions. I would ask, really, if you want to get involved, please, if at the very least, give your name to Georgia or Tom or Mary so that they can be in touch with you and help you get connected to ways that you can serve through the Knox community or directly through getting connected at World Relief as an individual.
Yeah. We want to thank all of you for being here. All of you came out on a weeknight to find out about how to help our immigrant neighbors, and that is awesome. We are so proud to serve this church and so thankful for all of you. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, you taught your disciples that your kingdom is like a grain of mustard seed. So small, so seemingly insignificant. And God, at this moment in our nation's life and in the life of our community, it feels like all we have are mustard seeds. All we have are little steps that we can take. We wish, God, that we had a magic wand we could wave to fix the problems of our nation, to heal the hurts that so many people are experiencing, but we don't. Jesus, we ask you to help us to see what mustard seeds can become. God, I think of that elderly Christian family that met that Muslim family at the airport and loved them. I think of the countless tiny acts of tenderness and love our home team showed to our immigrant family. God, I know that small acts of truth-telling, of kindness, of love, of dialogue, of compassion, that these might not count for much in the world's point of view, but in your point of view, they are mighty and powerful and worthy. And so, God, increase our faith in mustard seed actions. Help us to take one step, even just one step, towards your calling in this urgent time. Open our hearts to what you would have us do and who you would have us be. And God, I just feel in my heart tonight that vision of Revelation chapter 7. We're gathered around the throne of Jesus Christ, the Lamb who is slain, are people from every tongue and tribe and nation. And God, I rejoice that Christianity is not an American religion or a Canadian religion or a Mexican religion. It belongs to the world. And Jesus, I just ask you to make me ready to be part of that throng around your throne. Make all of us ready. Make this church ready. And help us, Lord, to show compassion. Lord Jesus, we cast our cares on you. And even in this challenging time, we give you thanks and praise, knowing that nothing in heaven or on earth will separate us from your love. It's in your strong name that we pray. Amen. Thank you all so much for being here. We're going to hang around for Q&A. Thank you.